She looks up at the TV to what she thinks is a woman sucking on a lollipop. She is forced to take naps with her father almost every day. She remembers having to place a pillow underneath his arm so she could sneak off, still smelling the beer on his breath. She lives in constant fear that her stay-at-home, alcoholic father will hurt her. She will learn to live with physical, sexual, emotional, and verbal abuse, all the while acting as if everything is okay. Well, that little girl was me, and I stand here today to tell you how I moved from being a victim of abuse to being a survivor using the 3 Gs. The 3 Gs are getting honest, getting help, and giving help. Now, let me start out by telling you the facts about abuse in this country. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be victims of sexual assault have reported being victims of sexual assault before the age of 18. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was at my gynecologist's office, and she told me that 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime. And she told me preventative measures and signs and symptoms of breast cancer. And I remember seeing the breast cancer awareness ribbon, and just last month was Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I thought about how great an effort was being made to remedy this problem of breast cancer. And on the way home, it hit me. 1 in 8 versus 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 girls and boys that will be sexually assaulted before the age of 18. The CDC released a report earlier this year that states just 1 year of confirmed cases of child abuse and neglect would cost our country $124 billion over the course of their lifetime. And let me explain that, because I know it just sounds like mathematical and kind of hard to understand. So, just 1 year of confirmed cases of abuse and neglect. That's about roughly 700,000. And by confirmed cases, that's only the very tip of the iceberg, because those are only the cases that were brought to the attention of child welfare, which is a small fraction of the abuse that is actually happening in this country. So, just a year of those confirmed cases would cost our country $124 billion. And you're probably wondering, where is all that money going towards? Well, that money is going towards systems like special education and the justice system and child welfare and rehabs, because the chances that a survivor of abuse will be a part of one of those systems is dramatically higher than those who have never been through any form of abuse. And the statistic I would like to end on, because it's the one that impacted me the most, is that over 1/2 of people diagnosed with mental illness in this country have been through some form of abuse or trauma in their lifetime. Let me repeat that. Over 1/2 of people with a mental illness in this country have been through some form of abuse or trauma in their lifetime. So now that we can kind of recognize the epidemic that abuse is in this country, I want to ask you all a question. Who here is pro-abuse? Who here is just gung-ho and really for abuse? Yeah, that's what I thought, right? No one. And I'd go so far as to say that's probably a common belief around our country. So then where's the controversy? Well, there's a huge discrepancy between our common beliefs and our common actions as a country relating to abuse. There are many contributing factors to this gap, and I just want to touch on a few. I think that the main contributing factor are societal norms. And as a country, we're generally conservative. We would like to keep the government and other families out of our intimate family details, right? Well, that poses an issue because 76% of child sexual abuse is committed by a family member or an intimate family friend. We also, as a country, like to stay away from the taboo, and abuse is uncomfortable for people who've been through it and people who haven't. And I understand that, but it creates a culture of silence around the issue of abuse, which keeps it hidden and in denial. There's also laws and policies that keep this gap from getting smaller. For example, the statutes of limitation. What that is a law for people who've been through sexual assault or sexual abuse, and it limits the amount of time that these victims are able to charge their abuser. So if we as a country think that abuse is wrong and that perpetrators should be punished or at least faced up to their crimes, then why would we have a law that prohibits the amount of time a survivor of abuse can get justice? And in most states, it's less than 10 years. For me, it took about 16, and that's the lesser side. So the contributing factors are the norms and the silencing, the laws and policies. So to remedy that, we need to get honest about this issue, which brings us to our first G, getting honest. Individual survivors have some barriers, some internal and external barriers. Some external barriers include victim blame, such as, she was really drunk, she should have known that was going to happen. Or in domestic violence situations, why doesn't she just leave? Or she always picks partners like this, it must be what she's looking for. Well, let me remind you all that victims do not choose their abusers, abusers choose their victims. And in domestic violence situations, it's very dangerous and sometimes deadly to leave. Some internal barriers to getting honest as a survivor of abuse are some feelings and fears. Some of the main fears are fear of not being believed, which is very common on even family members and society at large, and also fear of being judged as if for some reason it's our fault. There are also deep feelings of guilt and shame, which leads to the biggest roadblock of all, which is denial, which I already touched on. I have some experience with denial. In May of 2014, I had a flashback. I was working on an assignment that I had procrastinated on in college, when all of a sudden I had a flashback of sexual abuse. And I had recognized the physical and the verbal and the emotional, but it wasn't until this point that tipped me over into the awareness. I couldn't get out of bed for a week, and I knew I needed to get help, which leads us to our second G, getting help. Now, society and individuals need help with this issue so we can come together and do something about it. Society can break some of the barriers I talked about earlier, like recognizing that this is happening in mass numbers. We can also change policies and laws as a society that better reflect the interests of survivors. With individuals, abuse does not discriminate on age or race or gender or religion or state, so therefore the things that we do to get help will be vastly different. I've had some survivors tell me that they heal through meditation, through yoga, to deal with their trauma, turning to religion, or just simply turning to the loved ones in their lives and expressing what happened or talking about how they feel. I personally got professional help and got sober, and I'm not alone. 2/3 of individuals in rehabs have been through some form of abuse. 2/3. That's too high of a percentage. After about a year into my healing journey of getting help, I decided I needed to give help, which brings us to our last G, giving help. I started a little organization called Bears Share Care, and what we do is raise awareness about abuse and send booklets to survivors of abuse. And what those booklets include are positive affirmations that help combat anxiety, shame, guilt. It includes signs and symptoms of abuse, a section of my personal story, empowering songs and quotes, It even includes celebrities who have been through abuse, such as Oprah Winfrey. I had a woman reach out to me after she got receiving the booklet and told me that she decided to leave her abusive husband of 20 years and get her and her daughter out of that situation. And what that taught me was what an integral part this was to complete my healing journey. I created the 3 Gs retrospectively looking back on my journey. And I realized how important this issue is and how little is actually being done about it and how little it's being talked about. The chances that a survivor of abuse will enter into an abusive relationship, have children, and continue the cycle of abuse are remarkably higher than those who have never been through any form of abuse. I know I touched on some laws and policies earlier, and the law that's currently in place in most states, like 49 of them, is the force requirement. And this is a law that requires a victim of sexual assault to be able to prove the assault via force or threat of force. And as we can kind of imagine, force doesn't always leave bruises, and threat of force, verbal force, can pretty much never be proven. But I want to leave you all with some hope as far as the laws and policies, because there are some states that are doing something about this, like California. They've enacted an affirmative consent law, which basically just means that that any person in a sexual act needs to consent to the act. And I know that that's imperfect and kind of awkward, right? But at least it shows an effort to do something about this issue and a huge step forward. So you know that little girl I told you about earlier? She is still working on herself. She works to heal almost every day. She's finally learning to trust herself and those around her for the first time in her life. She is finally learning to love. I want you all to remember that you are the heroes of this idea. We can change our state. We can change our nation. We can change the world. We can stop the cycle of abuse by healing ourselves. Thank you.